it may be more casual than we'd like, it's captivating, entertaining, and a true adventure worthy of the Zelda name. It's different, but it's still the real deal. IGN. Phantom Hourglass is absolutely worth playing and is certainly one of the better games in the DS's library, but its quest is one of the less memorable entries in the Zelda canon. Play Magazine. It may not have the epic feel of its big console cousins, but the DS manages to create a Zelda experience that is truly unique, game style. The quickie dungeons and throttled exploration are outright disappointing, but when held up against the rest of the DS library, it's an impressive game. But it's just a good Zelda. Game trailers. 7.8 out of 10. Too much water. No, wait, wrong franchise. These are just some of the things said about Phantom Hourglass by critics on Metacritic, and by looking at its Metacritic page, you would think Phantom Hourglass is a good game, but compared to the other Zelda titles, its score is a bit low. It's only higher than its direct sequel, Spirit Tracks, various remakes that are all lower than their original games, the Minish Cap, and the various Four Swords games. Looking at the audience scores, you see a very similar trend. Phantom Hourglass has a 7.8 audience score, the same exact score as Spirit Tracks, and is only higher than the various Four Swords games. But those are multiplayer, so that's to be expected from a mostly single-player focused franchise. With Spirit Tracks, it seems most of the complaints are pretty much the same as Phantom Hourglass, with a couple of small different complaints. So, what happened? Why are Phantom Hourglass's reviews so mixed? And why is it considered such a low point for the series? Was it really so bad, and am I the weird one for having it be one of my favorite Zelda games? I'm Echo, and in this video, we're going to be looking at what I would consider the most overhated Zelda game in the franchise, The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass. Now, admittedly, Metacritic isn't the most reliable place to go to for game reviews, and even some of the low score reviews are just, I don't like this one thing, so let's give it a low score. So you can't really rely on them, but they do give you a glimpse into how people perceive the game. Unfortunately, this sentiment isn't only on Metacritic, but it's everywhere. Looking at places like Reddit, Zelda Universe, and Nintendo World Report, places where you would think you would tend to find positive reviews of games like this, there's so many mixed reviews and people calling it the worst Zelda adventure, aside from Zelda 2, but we don't talk about that. What are some of the big pain points people have with this game? Looking at all these reviews, I think I've managed to narrow it down to 4 different major complaints, and plenty of minor ones, but they're not really the focus for this video. These 4 big complaints are the touchscreen controls, the fact that despite being a direct sequel to Wind Waker, it doesn't really feel like it, the fairly lacking exploration, instead choosing to focus on dungeons that aren't really that deep, and finally, the Temple of the Ocean King. There's also plenty of minor ones, like the soundtrack being lackluster, people not liking certain puzzles, relying on different gimmicks of the DS's technology, and the shorter length of the game compared to other Zelda titles. While I want to talk about these, like I mentioned in the intro, Phantom Hourglass is one of my favorite Zelda games, and while I acknowledge that it does have its problems, there are plenty of things the game does that I think are really worth the praise. So, while I'll do my best to be unbiased in the review, there's still absolutely going to be some bias. I also have not played every single Zelda game, mainly some of the more fan-favorite ones like Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, and Wind Waker, mostly due to just not having the means or desire to really play them. I am planning on going through and doing videos like this on them in the future, as well as streaming my first playthroughs with them both here and on my Twitch, starting with Spirit Tracks, since it's the sequel to Phantom Hourglass. So, if you're interested in those videos once I finish playing the games, why not subscribe? If you haven't played the game yourself, I highly recommend it, because how else would you call me an idiot for liking this game without experiencing it for yourself first? But I also know that due to it being on the DS, it can be a bit hard to find without sailing the 7 seas. Get it? Because Link's a pirate? Yeah, I'll stop trying to be funny. Anyways, I highly recommend watching someone like Chugga Conroy's playthrough of Phantom Hourglass, because he goes really in-depth about parts of the game and shows off almost everything there is to know about it. It's a very good playthrough to watch if you're unable to play the game yourself. Shameless plugs out of the way, I want to talk about the 4 pain points I mentioned earlier, but because of how much I do love this game, and just generally not liking being overly negative about video games in general, for each pain point I talk about, I'm going to talk about something that the game does that is worth praise. Because while the game does have some kinda low lows, it also has some very high highs, and some of the best uses of the DS's various technologies. Pain point number 1, the touchscreen controls. With Phantom Hourglass being on the DS, it makes use of all of the DS's various gimmicks, ranging from the microphone to even just closing the DS's screen. The biggest of these is the touchscreen. If you look at the gameplay on screen here, you can see 2 screens, one bigger and one smaller due to how I set up my emulator. The bigger one here is the bottom screen, or the touch screen. The smaller screen on the right is the top screen, which doesn't have any touchscreen functionality. Because of the game having almost exclusively touch controls, the game takes place primarily on the touchscreen. When you touch the stylus to the screen, Link moves to wherever you've tapped, and if you hold on the screen, he continues walking. Drawing small circles at the edges of the screen will make Link roll, and that's about it when it comes to movement. Once you get your sword, making small swipes will make Link swing his sword. Tapping on an enemy will make Link either jump attack them, or if they're close enough, he'll just poke them. Drawing a small circle around Link will make him spin attack, and of course, all of the items use a touchscreen, but we'll get into those in a little bit. When it comes to Linebeck's boat, you draw on the map to chart the course, and the boat will move automatically following that path. Holding left and right on the screen will move the camera in its respective direction. Touching on the screen will cause the camera to fire at wherever you tapped, and the small arrow at the bottom of the screen is used to jump. The only gameplay during the boat sections is shooting at enemies, the occasional rocks that are in the way, and jumping over traps that rise from the water. Just small annoyances that keep you from idling as the boat boats its way along the path. As you can see, both movement and combat use the touchscreen at the same time. This can be kinda problematic, especially in certain fights. If you miss the enemy you're trying to jump attack, you kinda just end up walking into them rather than actually attacking them. And some of the swiping when it comes to sword attacks can be a little inconsistent, where instead of swinging, Link will either just run or roll, or when you're trying to spin attack, you'll kinda just end up spamming regular swings. It can lead to some pretty frustrating moments in combat and cause you to take way more hits than you would normally if the systems were split. This, of course, isn't counting the problem of all of the gameplay being shown on the touchscreen, where you have to be, touching in order to play, which causes your hand to sometimes be blocking the screen when you're trying to play. This isn't much of a problem if you have small hands. If you have larger hands, they can get in the way of you being able to actually see the screen, and with how small some DSs can be if they're just like the regular ones and not XLs, it can be a little annoying, honestly. While it does lead to some interesting aspects of the game, like being able to draw on the map for puzzles and reminders of items you can't get yet, I honestly have to agree on the touch controls. It's easily the most frustrating part of the game, and I would much rather play the game with button controls instead of the touchscreen, as the amount of times where the controls just didn't quite work the way I wanted them to was a bit higher than I would have liked. However, this leads into my first praise point for Phantom Hourglass, the items. Praise point number 1, the items. The items in Phantom Hourglass all make fantastic use of the touchscreen, giving us some of the most unique versions of items that are found in multiple Zelda titles, so let's just go in the order you get them. Of course, like all Zelda games, the items are used in their respective dungeon boss fights, but we're going to talk about that when we get to the bosses, as that's more tied to the bosses themselves rather than the items. The first item you find in the first dungeon is a Zelda classic but with a twist, introducing the boomerang. While not as flashy of a boomerang like the one that's found in Twilight Princess, Phantom Hourglass's boomerang is a very good item that's used up until the very end of the game. Unlike previous Zelda games, due to the camera being top-down and not having Z-targeting, you instead draw the path you want the boomerang to go. Because of this, it's able to be thrown around corners to hit and stun enemies like the Phantom Eyes in the Temple of the Ocean King, but it's also used to stun enemies like the Zora warriors by throwing it behind them and hitting their backs around the shield. It has all the same uses that other Zelda boomerangs do too, like being able to pick up items and bring them back, spread fire across different torches, and serve as a decent ranged weapon until you get the bow. All in all, it's a very solid item and one of the best versions of the boomerang that we've gotten. Unfortunately, the second item you find isn't as interesting, as it's just a shovel. I'm not even sure what to say about it. It's a shovel, it digs dirt. Like, it has some uses in puzzles, but that's it. It just digs where you tap. It's just a shovel. The third item also isn't as interesting as the boomerang is. The bombs in Phantom Hourglass are just your standard Zelda bombs. You hold them in a bag, and you throw them to make things go boom. Like most Zelda games, there's walls and secret passages for you to open up with bombs, and they're pretty okay for combat, blowing up on impact with enemies, but other than that, they're really just bombs. There's nothing too interesting about them. The fourth item is yet another Zelda classic without a new spin on it, the Hero's Bow. It's just a bow that fires arrows where you tap, or you can hold it in order to aim it. The only interesting new things it can do is being able to be shot in certain eye switches that can only be hit by arrows, and these weird little orbs that look like a bow and arrow that redirect your arrow in the direction they're facing. Again, just like the bombs, it's nothing too interesting. The next two items can be gotten in any order, but for this video, we're just going to go with the order that I got them in. The Bomb Chews make their grand return, with what is possibly the best implementation of them seen in the franchise. They make great use of the touchscreen, as instead of controlling them with the control stick, you draw a small segment on the map in order to chart a path for the Bombchu. The top and bottom screen will change places, with the top screen following the cursor to show where the Bombchu will hit. Once you've drawn your path, watch the Bombchu go. The camera on the touchscreen will follow the Bombchu initially, but the best part is that if you tap the screen while the Bombchu is moving, you can still have full control over Link while the Bombchu goes and does its thing. This is used in good effect in different puzzles in the Goron Temple, and just makes it a much more interactive version of the bombs that you obtained earlier in the game. The penultimate item in Phantom Hourglass is my personal favorite, the grappling hook. Found in the Temple of Ice, the grappling hook is probably the most versatile item in the game. Not only can it be used to pull yourself to objects like wooden posts, chests, and rocks, it can also be used to attack enemies, serving as an alternative to the bow and a boomerang. Of course, there's also enemies that have armor that can get pulled off by the hook to weaken them. All this is before we even get into the unique things the grapple can do. By drawing a line between two posts, you can create a rope between them, opening up even more possibilities. With the rope connecting them, you can jump up on the posts and walk across them like a tightrope. You can run into them in order to slingshot yourself across gaps and up ledges, and you can even reflect projectiles using the rope. Somehow. You can also connect enemies to posts, dragging them to the posts, and in the case of a certain boss, stunning them. The last item you find is the hammer, but unlike most hammers in Zelda games, this one's ranged because apparently a tiny fairy can lift a hammer the size of Link. If you hold the hammer, you can increase the size of the hammer, bonking even more enemies with every bonk. There's also small tiles you can flip, needing to either match them all or to a pattern you've seen before. There's also these small little switches you can hit that'll catapult Link up platforms. All of these items make great use of the touchscreen, while also some of them innovate on items that we've seen before in other Zelda games, making each one feel unique even though it's still familiar. They really did a good job with the items, and they were honestly one of my favorite parts about the game and its combat. Pain point number 2, being a Wind Waker sequel. Phantom Hourglass is a direct sequel to Wind Waker, but it doesn't really feel like it both in terms of story and exploration. While this can technically be considered one point, I'm going to talk about them separately. For this section, I'm going to talk about the world itself, while the exploration aspects are going to be another point later. Phantom Hourglass as a sequel just kinda fails and falls flat. The only parts of this game that are related to Wind Waker at all is the very beginning with Tetra's crew, the fact that saving Tetra is the main reason for the adventure, and the fact that this Link is the same as Wind Waker Link. That's pretty much where Phantom Hourglass being a sequel ends. The world isn't the same, you don't have any characters or islands from Wind Waker at all, other than Tetra's crew for the first, 10 minutes of the game. Nothing else about the game really screams, this is a Wind Waker sequel, rather than just feeling like its own game. Unlike Tears of the Kingdom's Hyrule building off of Breath of the Wild's Hyrule, Phantom Hourglass features none of the islands from Wind Waker at all. It's an entirely new map. While this isn't that much of a problem, there really isn't anything to make it feel like a sequel. Now, having not played Wind Waker myself yet, this isn't that much of a problem for me. But considering Wind Waker is a very popular Zelda game, plenty of people went into Phantom Hourglass expecting it to keep building on that world, with the characters that they loved from Wind Waker, and they just didn't get any of that. Compare this to the last main sequel to a Zelda game, Majora's Mask. Just like how Phantom Hourglass takes place shortly after Wind Waker, Majora's Mask takes place shortly after Ocarina of Time. Majora's Mask also features multiple characters from Ocarina of Time, and while I'm not entirely sure since I haven't played either of them, I think that they aren't exactly the same characters, but rather just reused models. This was probably just due to Majora's Mask kind of being rushed and needing to use reused assets, but it also helped make it feel more connected to Ocarina of Time because of that. Pair this with the game having similar controls to Ocarina of Time, as opposed to the entirely different control scheme between Wind Waker and Phantom Hourglass, and Majora's Mask just feels like a much better sequel than Phantom Hourglass does. However, there is one aspect of it being a Wind Waker sequel that I actually kinda like, and while it isn't entirely tied to Wind Waker's story, I do like the fact that we don't get a Master Sword. Ganondorf's story ended with Wind Waker. He isn't the big bad anymore, so the Master Sword isn't needed. And while Skyward Sword apparently retconned some things about the Master Sword, that was after Phantom Hourglass's development, so I'm not really worried about any of that. The Master Sword originally was made to combat Ganon specifically, and in Phantom Hourglass we have a different type of evil, thus we need a different sword. Meet the Phantom Sword. Created by the blacksmith Zows using different ore Link has to collect throughout his journey, this is a new sword made using the power of the Phantom Hourglass and the Ocean King. This sword is made specifically to fight Bellum, and can defeat the phantoms in the Temple of the Ocean King, since they are a manifestation of Bellum's power. I really like this, just because we don't need the Master Sword. We aren't fighting the same evil we're used to in so many Zelda games, and we actually feel like we're making the sword ourselves. Well, making someone else make it for us. It makes it feel more personal, and makes sense considering we're using the power of the Ocean King to counter his nemesis, just like how the Master Sword used the power of the goddess to counter Ganon's power. Granted, we later find out its demise's power, but again, Skyward Sword was after Phantom Hourglass. There's also the music, where Phantom Hourglass has some good original soundtracks, Linebeck, my beloved. Its soundtrack is really lackluster for a Zelda game, and even a chunk of them are just songs from Wind Waker. All of the background music you hear in this video is from Phantom Hourglass, and honestly, I doubt most of you would be able to tell me what most of these songs were, and where they are, if I didn't show the names. This isn't to say it's bad. No Zelda game has a truly bad soundtrack, but for this franchise, it's one of, if not the worst. There really aren't that many songs, all dungeon bosses share the same song aside from the final boss, and all dungeons have the same theme, including the Temple of the Ocean King. Pretty much all of the islands share the same theme too. There's some unique themes for certain islands, but the same theme plays for most of the islands and it just gets so repetitive at times. It's not a bad soundtrack, but it's just lackluster compared to the rest of the franchise, even if it does have some good songs in it. Praise point number 2. The use of the DS's technologies to make unique mechanics. Phantom Hourglass, despite being limited in some aspects in order to fit on the Nintendo DS, which we'll get into in the next pain point, makes fantastic use of all of the DS's different gimmicks in order to make unique puzzles and mechanics during the adventure. The main place you see these come into play is the different sea charts, or the first two at least. This kinda starts to drop off in the later half of the game, and while I do think the dungeons in the later half are more enjoyable, the bosses too, the game stops doing as many of the different gimmicks. These range from using the microphone to blow out flames, drawing on the touchscreen to mark on your map, and even closing the DS to use a stamp. These are put to great use for certain parts of the game, so let's go over them in the order you encounter them. The first time we're introduced to the idea of being able to draw on our map, it's for a simple puzzle to figure out what order you need to pull a set of 4 levers in. When interacting with one of the signs for the first time, Ciela will tell you about being able to draw on your map. And once you hit the map button in the menu, the top and the bottom screen will switch, letting you draw on the map using the touchscreen. What's also nice is that the drawings will stay on the map until you erase them, so you don't even have to worry about them disappearing once you leave the area. The best part about this, as you can see on screen here, is you can even do this while there's dialogue on screen. You don't have to try to remember what it is you just read, you can just open up the map while the dialogue is still open and mark on your map. Now, the puzzles that they use this with aren't very hard, so you never really need to write them down, but it's still just a very neat feature. Of course, just like every Zelda game, there's also items and puzzles that you can't get or solve on your first visit to an area. Do you know what you can do to remember they're there? Draw it on the map. It's a really great way to be able to mark things down, as you can see exactly where it is you marked on the map for whenever you get the item, and you can write down what items needed. This gets used to great effect later with a certain island, but we'll get to that in a minute. The first time you're forced to use these unique mechanics is when you get the southwestern sea chart in the first visit to the Temple of the Ocean King. Once we bring it to Linebeck in a ship, we find out that the map is hiding something and Link needs to find it. When we look, the map is blank, but as you drag your stylus over the map, you hear the sound of rustling, and as you keep dragging across the map, you eventually start to scratch off something covering one of the islands. Congratulations, you found your first secret. Head on over to the Isle of Ember to claim your prize. On the Isle of Ember, you're introduced to a new mechanic, this time using the microphone. There's 2 ways that it's used, to either make Link shout or to blow something out. There are a couple times you need to do each of these throughout the game. The first time you need to shout is in Astrid the Fortune Teller's basement, as you need to shout at her in order to open up the door she's hiding behind. By blowing into the microphone, Link will actually blow in-game. This is used to get into the Temple of Fire on the Isle of Ember by blowing out the candles at the door. The second time you have to use the blowing mechanic is once you've gotten the Northwestern Sea Chart. Once you've gotten the Northwestern Sea Chart from the second Temple of the Ocean King visit, you see that the map is covered in sand. Of course, Link's not a normal person who just shakes the sand off the map when he finds it, so he brings it back to Linebeck, who tells you to clear it off anyways. This pulls up the sea chart on the bottom screen, and you need to blow into the microphone to blow off the sand, revealing the symbol of wisdom on the Isle of Gust. The last two big gimmicks with the DS's technology is going to be taking place in the third Temple of the Ocean King visit on floor B6. The first of these is the symbol door, where throughout the floor there are different signs to give in order to draw between, making an hourglass shape. You then draw the symbol on the door in the middle of the room and it opens, leading to the sun stamp room, which we'll get back to in a moment. I want to keep talking about this drawing door, because this isn't the only time that it gets used. While it's not able to be done until the fourth visit, because Link hasn't found the symbol yet, if you draw a Triforce on the door, it'll lead you to a different room, instead leading you to B7, unlocking the next half of the dungeon. This type of door also gets used on the Isle of Ruins to access Muto's temple, in a similar puzzle to the one found here, so I won't go too into detail on it. It's pretty much the same idea, draw between the signs, except you make a banner symbol instead of an hourglass or Triforce. Now, going back to the sun stamp room, I have a love-hate relationship with this puzzle, because I remember it being so frustrating as a kid, but also finding it really cool, and looking back on it now, I think it's probably one of, if not my favorite puzzle in the game. When you tap on the giant sun symbol to inspect it, it gives you a view of a map that looks a lot like the Southwestern Sea Chart with the symbol of courage on it, except the map looks off. This is because the map is upside down, because the sun symbol is actually just a giant stamp. Instead of drawing on the map or just marking it down, you have to select the Southwestern Sea Chart, and with the sun symbol's sea chart on the top screen and the actual Southwestern Sea Chart on the bottom, you have to close your DS. Like, not close out of the game or anything, but physically close the DS's screens and put it to sleep while the game is still running to actually emulate the feeling of stamping the map with the symbol. This puzzle is just really cool, from the fact that it feels like you're actually stamping it yourself, to the simple setup of having the stamp on the top screen and the actual map on the bottom. It's just really well made. However, this is also one of the hardest puzzles in the game, because the idea of putting the console into sleep actually affecting the game is just such a strange concept, because why would putting the console into sleep be the solution to a puzzle? I know I wasn't the only person stumped by this, as looking it up you can see so many posts about people feeling the same way. It's just very good at making you feel like an idiot, because the game just straight up tells you exactly what to do in the text when you interact with the stamp. Press the sacred crest against the sea chart to transfer it. The game just straight up tells you to press the sea chart against it, as well as being able to pull up the sea chart on the bottom. It's just such a good puzzle and makes use of a part of the DS that nobody ever thinks of, because how often is putting a game into sleep mode the solution to a puzzle? The bosses also all make great use of the top and bottom screen in different ways, but we'll get into that more once we get into the bosses section of the video. Pain point number 3. The lacking exploration in shallow dungeons. Lacking exploration isn't really a new complaint to the Zelda series, with it being one of the bigger complaints I've seen about Twilight Princess, and how people felt that the series was putting more focus on dungeons rather than the exploration that people loved in Wind Waker, which I don't really agree with. I thought the exploration in Twilight Princess was fine, just a little tedious at times. One of the biggest reasons exploration in Phantom Hourglass feels so lacking is the lack of things to explore. While there are multiple islands, including some uncharted ones that I'll get into in the next section, there aren't as many different islands to go between, with the majority of them being required visits. People also complained about the fact that pieces of heart were removed and instead replaced with whole heart containers. This led to people having complaints about there not being enough things to collect, while there are still plenty in Phantom Hourglass. Heart containers, courage gems, wisdom gems, power gems, fish, treasure charts, and ship parts are all different collectibles. While this is less than other Zelda games, there are still plenty of collectibles to gather, with multiple of them having active effects on the gameplay. Of course, the fact that you don't entirely have control over your ship doesn't help. Instead, it just sails automatically on the path that you draw. Of course, you can't just let it go either. You have to be paying attention constantly for enemies and these floating barricades that appear suddenly, which just makes the whole sailing feel like a drag. This also isn't getting into the dungeons either, which are honestly kinda lackluster. They aren't even very long experiences. The one that took me the longest was the Temple of Ice, and that was just because of skill issues. They tend to follow the same Zelda dungeon design. You play through solving puzzles until you get the dungeon item, and then solve more puzzles using the dungeon item, and then use it to beat the boss. The problem here is most of Phantom Hourglass's dungeons just kinda suck. They all have the same dungeon crawling music that tends to get old fairly quickly, and they all just kinda look the same. Sure, there's small differences in the dungeons themselves, like they all have different floors and walls, but compared to dungeons in other Zelda games, they just feel so samey. There are some nice puzzles in later dungeons, like using Gon-Garon in the Goron Temple, the use of the grapple hook in the Temple of Ice, and the water levels and the launching mechanics with the Hamber in Muto's Temple, but the rest really just aren't memorable and fall flat. This also isn't helped with the fact that none of the dungeons really have mini-bosses in the middle of them like previous games did. Instead, the dungeon items are just kind of sitting there in a chest instead of being guarded by a boss. It doesn't really have that same sense of accomplishment. Take getting the Gale Boomerang in Twilight Princess for example. The mini-boss actually uses the item against the player, and we pick it up from them after the fight. It just doesn't feel as good in Phantom Hourglass as compared to the other games, and that's not counting the mostly lacking puzzles either. The one part that the dungeons definitely don't lack in is the actual bosses. I honestly think that the only bad boss in the game is the one in the Temple of Wind, because he doesn't really do anything unique, you just kinda throw bombs at him. If you look at all of these screenshots of each dungeon, you can see just how similar they all look. It really just feels like recolors of the same dungeon. Compare this to Twilight Princess, the game that came out before Phantom Hourglass, and look at how different and unique each of these dungeons are. These are how Zelda dungeons should feel, but Phantom Hourglass just falls flat compared to the other games. The two dungeons that I feel break this mold are the Temple of the Ocean King and the Ghost Ship. While I have an entire section dedicated to the Temple of the Ocean King, so I'm not going to talk about it here, let's talk about the Ghost Ship, and what I would consider the most unique dungeon in Phantom Hourglass, and the easy standout in this game. While each dungeon has some small puzzle to get into it, the Temple of Fire having the candles to blow out, the Temple of Courage having you line up statues with the temple to open it, and the Goron Temple having you answer a quiz with the Goron Chief, the Ghost Ship's entrance puzzle is the most unique out of all of them. Your first introduction to the Ghost Ship outside of the intro cutscene is when you break through the rocks with the cannon leading to Melita Island. You see it heading into the northwestern sea and chase after it before being surrounded by the same fog you saw in the cutscene at the beginning of the game. Of course, you try to chase after it into the fog, but after a while end up back close to the beginning of the fog. You were then guided to Melita Island, where there is a wayfarer that made it through the Ghost Ship's fog. After solving some puzzles to find his hideaway, you're shown a map that has a path on it through the Ghost Ship's fog. Using the touchscreen, you draw that path onto your sea chart, and then you follow that path with your ship and you're able to make it through the fog into the northwestern sea. Of course, there's no Ghost Ship to be found yet. You don't get to actually find the Ghost Ship until about the midpoint of the game once you've rescued all 3 fairies. Once you have them, you then head up to the Ghost Ship fog once more and get a really cool sequence where you actually have control over the boat rather than just drawing a path for Linebeck to follow. Once more, you sail into the fog that hides the Ghost Ship and start following the path that leads you through the fog. When you start going through the fog, however, the engine breaks down and Link needs to take over and guide the ship because Linebeck has to keep the engine together. This leads to you steering the ship, following the blinking of the 3 fairies you've rescued so far. They act as a ghost ship detector, and the more they blink, the closer you are to the ghost ship. It's honestly a really cool section that's less of a puzzle, but actually controlling the ship for the first time to find the ghost ship feels really good, especially being able to follow the fairies as they guide you. You then board the ghost ship, which captures the feeling of an old decrepit ship really well, and instead of being a normal dungeon where you find the boss key and throw it into a door, you instead need to find 4 sisters and reunite them. This can be a little frustrating because it's just an escort quest except you do it 3 times instead of once, but it is unique compared to the rest of the dungeons in the game. When you find each of the sisters, you need to bring them back to the first floor of the dungeon where the first sister is waiting. While you escort them, you will have to avoid a patrolling Reapling, which behaves exactly like the phantoms in the Temple of the Ocean King do. You also have to avoid the Skulltulas that drop down, as they will make the sister scream and bring the Reapling to you. If the sister gets scared or you run too far away, you need to run back to her and talk to her in order to get her to follow you again. It also houses one of the most annoying puzzles in the game that I can never seem to remember the right order of. In Basement 3 of the Ghost Ship, there are 5 levers to pull, and a sign that tells you what order to pull them in, except it can be interpreted in 2 different ways. Some things in this world were meant to be pulled. 2, 4, 5, 1, 3. There is always an order in which such things must be pulled. Of course, as you do with every puzzle with an order in this game, you write it down on the map. However, this is where I, and many other people on the internet, apparently got stumped. Thank God, it makes me feel not nearly as bad about being stuck here for as long as I was. There are 2 ways to interpret this puzzle. The wrong way, which is what I thought you had to do, is to think that this is telling you that you pull the 2nd switch first, and then the 4th switch, and then the 5th, the 1st, and then the 3rd, ordering them from where you walk into the room left to right. This is the wrong way to do it. The right way to solve the puzzle is to draw the numbers right below where the switches are, and pull them in the order shown on the sign. The 4th lever is 1st, the 1st lever is 2nd, the 5th lever is 3rd, the 2nd lever is 4th, and the 3rd lever is 5th. This puzzle is so frustratingly simple, but annoying because you can just read it the wrong way and end up stumped here for so long. Looking back on it, I can't believe this took me as long as it did when I replayed it, considering how simple it is. That's about where my praise for the dungeons in this game ends, however. I just really didn't find them to be as standout as other Zeldas, and the mediocre exploration outside of dungeons doesn't really help with that. However, while some of the exploration does suck, there is one very good aspect about the exploration that makes up the third praise point. Praise point number 3, the islands. Now, I know that this feels strange coming right off of me saying that the exploration is lacking, but hear me out. The islands in Phantom Hourglass, though limited, are fantastic. Now, this mostly falls onto the optional islands, but even some of the main dungeon islands that you need to progress have some fantastic elements to them. There are 3 different island types in Phantom Hourglass. Main islands, where the dungeon and unlocking the dungeon is the main focus, like the Isle of Ember or Molita Island. Mapped islands, that are already mapped onto the sea charts like main islands, but the game doesn't force you to go to them, like Banan Island for example. The third type is the Uncharted Islands, which are the most unique of the 3. These are islands that aren't marked on the sea chart and tend to be either mini-games or tied to an important optional unlock. I'm not going to talk about every island here, I'm just going to go over my favorites and the 3 really important Uncharted islands, starting with the important Uncharted ones. The only required Uncharted island, and obviously the most important because of that, is Zeus's Island. This is probably the simplest of the Uncharted islands too, as it's literally just a house belonging to the blacksmith Zeus. When you first find him, he doesn't seem that important, but after you beat the ghost ship, Oshus tells you to find Zeus to craft the Phantom Sword. He also gives you the Triforce symbol needed for drawing the door in the Temple of the Ocean King that I mentioned earlier, as well as sending you on the second half of the quest to get the 3 ore to make the Phantom Sword. There's also a treasure map and a wisdom gem on the island too, but it really only exists to have Zeus on it. The second most important one is probably the first Uncharted island you found in your playthrough. Just south of Molita Island is 3 big rocks on the sea chart in a triangle, and in the middle of them is Spirit Island. Spirit Island is a very important island, as inside the cave on the island there's a shrine where once you get every 10 gems of a certain type, you can upgrade their respective spirit. This is fairly important, as this is how you get your damage upgrades in the form of the Spirit of Power, your damage reduction in the Spirit of Wisdom, and the ability to fire beams out of your sword with the Spirit of Courage. These abilities don't unlock until you have 10 of the respective gem, but they do get upgraded once you get all 20 of the respective gem, which is often right before the final visit to the Temple of the Ocean King, as the last gems are tied to the final islands. The third very important Uncharted island is in the Northwestern Sea, just below Banan Island. Sail there, and you've reached the Uncharted Island. Yes, that's its name, you'll see why. Once arriving there, you'll find that the map is completely blank, or uncharted if you will. Wandering around, you'll find a statue you can hit. These statues have been all around the game and have provided hints and dialogue when you smack them, but haven't really been super important to this video up until now. They're apparently called Gossip Stones, but I don't remember ever seeing their name in Phantom Hourglass, so I just call them boyoyoings because that's the sound they make when you hit them. When you hit the boyoyoing in the center of the map, it'll tell you a riddle, and you need to solve it to solve the island. It steers with a rudder, then makes a spray. In third it paddles, and then sees away. This tells you the order to hit the different boyoyoings, but it doesn't really make much sense at first. To solve it, you need to walk around the island and draw the perimeter of it, revealing the shape of a whale. This is honestly just such a cool puzzle where you get to actively chart an island. Every other island in the game already has its map made when you get there, including all of the other Uncharted islands, so being able to actually make your own map for the island feels really unique, and it makes great use of the touchscreen and being able to draw on the map. Once you've drawn the map, you then hit the boyoyoing at its tail, or rudder, and then the boyoyoing at the whale's waterspout. The third boyoyoing is on the fin at the bottom, and the fourth is the one on the whale's eye. Once you've hit all 4 boyoyoings, a bridge appears next to the one that originally told you the riddle. Once you go back and cross the bridge, you then get to meet Golden Chief Cyclos, who gives you access to this game's fast travel. In order to make use of the fast travel, around the sea there are different golden frogs that jump out of the water. Shooting them with your cannon prompts them to start talking, and then they show you a symbol and tell you to mark it on your map. Then, whenever you draw that symbol on the cyclone plate, it'll teleport you to where you shot the frog. Those are just the important Uncharted islands, and the others you can find are often just minigames that give you heart containers and spirit gems. In the Southeast Sea, there's Harrow Island, which is just a digging minigame where you can dig up 10 treasures, which is really just rupees and occasionally treasure maps, nothing important. Also in the Southeast Sea is DS Island, one of my favorites. DS Island is an island in the shape of a Nintendo DS, hence the name, And while there isn't much to do here at first, if you come back after beating the Goron Temple, you'll find Gongoron, and you can play a minigame where you have to take control of Gongoron and roll around the island hitting different targets. This is just a fun little island with a fun little minigame, giving a pretty good reward in the form of a bomb chew bag. There is one last uncharted island, Maze Island. Like its name suggests, it's a maze minigame, and this one is pretty cool, but can be a little frustrating at times. When you hit the boing on the map, it'll start a maze for a small cost, with the cost increasing for each difficulty. Scattered across the maze are more boings that pop up on your map, and it's your job to find the path to hit all of them and get to the reward before time runs out. There's 3 different difficulties to the maze, each one adding more boings and changing the path that you need to take. Beginner has only 4 boings and rewards a wisdom gem, Normal has 8 and rewards a treasure map, and Expert has 14 and rewards a heart container. Each path also requires you to make use of the different items you've gotten so far, and it's just a fun and rewarding minigame for you to do right before the final stretch of the game. The main dungeon islands themselves also have some great aspects to them, while some of the others can be a little lacking. Goron Island is one of the ones that's a little lacking, as its big thing to unlock the temple is just answering different questions about the Gorons on the island. While it fits with the island itself, compared to some of the others it just kinda falls flat. The Isle of Frost does something similar, where unlocking the dungeon is based around talking to the island residents, but it's done in a much more interesting way. Of course, before you can reach the Isle of Frost, there's a bunch of ice that's blocking the island, so you have to circle around and shoot all of the different ice to make it sink back into the water. It's not really much, but it's just kind of this cool little thing that you have to do to unlock the island, that a lot of the islands later game have. Once you reach the island and go talk to the island chief, he'll tell you that the Yuk have infiltrated the Enoki, and won't tell you about the pure metal until you find the imposter. So, you head to the Enoki estate and play the hit game Among Us, talking to the Enoki in the houses to find out which of the Enoki is sus. Once you've found the Yuk, you then get access to the island's dungeon. Like the Goron Island, it involves talking to the inhabitants, but it's much more interactive and engaging than taking a quiz. The Isle of Ember isn't very interesting either. However, with Isle of Ember being the first dungeon island, it does get a little bit of a pass, because the player is still getting introduced to everything. You just rescue Astrid, find her assistant Skeleton, and then blow out the candles on the volcano to enter the Temple of Fire. The other 3 main dungeon islands are much more interesting. Melita Island is actually required to be visited twice, and one of them doesn't even involve the dungeon in any way. The first visit has you trying to find a way through the ghost ship fog, and leads you to the Wayfarer's hideaway, giving you the path through the fog to make it to the Isle of Gust. The second visit is after getting through the Temple of the Ocean King and getting the Sun Key from the salvage spot you marked with the symbol of courage. This unlocks the sun door you probably saw when getting the Wayfarer's notes on the ghost ship fog, so you go back and unlock that to get to the second half of the island containing the Temple of Courage. To then get into the temple, you need to line up a couple of beam-firing statues and get them to line up with the Temple of Courage door to unlock it. The next dungeon island is the Isle of Gust. While it technically takes place in between the first and second visit to Melita Island, I didn't see a reason to split them up. On the Isle of Gust, there's strong winds that'll push Link in the direction of the wind, and you need to time your jumps both with and against the wind. At the top of the island, there's a map with 3 windmills marked. You need to avoid the sandworms and blow on the 3 windmills to access the Temple of Wind. The most interesting of the dungeon islands is actually 2 islands combined. I'm lumping both together for this because of how interlinked both the Isle of the Dead and the Isle of Ruins are. Starting with the Isle of the Dead, when you try to go to the Isle of Ruins for the first time, you're blocked by a cyclone. This leaves the only other island in the northeastern sea, that being the Isle of the Dead. When you reach the Isle of the Dead for the first time and head to the Big Pyramid, you find out that it's a maze. In order to make it through, you need to go to the graveyard and learn which path to take. Reading the different gravestones will teach you the pattern through the Phantom Corridor, letting you reach the end of the pyramid. Once you make it through the pyramid, you then get a necklace from a ghost of a knight, allowing you to the Isle of Ruins. Once you approach the Isle of Ruins, the cyclone will disappear, letting you dock. This is honestly just really cool. Having to go to another island and solve its puzzles just to be able to get to the actual main island is nice, and it ends up making the Isle of Ruins feel like a much bigger accomplishment, which is good because it houses the last of the main dungeons, not counting the final Temple of the Ocean King visit. Once you do reach the Isle of Ruins, it's not just a straight shot to the final dungeon. Instead, you have to go around the island, talking to the 3 different knights and do their tasks in order to learn how to reach the temple and lower the water level of the island. The first knight extends a bridge for you to be able to reach the second knight, who then sends you back to the first knight with a key. You can then use the key on the golden obelisk in the temple to lower the water level of the entire island, allowing much more exploration and opening the path to the final knight. The final night gives you a trial and opens a door, leading to a red drawing door. In order to know what to draw, you must go to the maze on the southwest part of the island and use the stone tablets in the maze to learn and draw the symbol to open the door. Once you've done this, you can now enter Muto's temple. The entire segment of the Isle of Ruins is just great. Having the two islands relating to each other like this, and getting to go through and explore the ruined Cobble Kingdom is a nice touch, as well as being the only island where your actions cause a permanent, massive change to the island. It just makes for a fantastic last little bit of exploration in the final stretch of the game, and is in my opinion the best dungeon unlock in Phantom Hourglass. Of course, there's one last dungeon and island that you can't talk about Phantom Hourglass without mentioning, Murkay Island and the Temple of the Ocean King. Pain point number 4, the Temple of the Ocean King. The Temple of the Ocean King. Probably the most controversial part of this game. I honestly almost put it as a praise point, but after doing some research and a second playthrough to get more footage, I decided it would probably just be better to make it a pain point. Originally, this was going to be the only topic of the video, and then it turned into whatever this is. The Temple of the Ocean King is a recurring dungeon throughout Phantom Hourglass, and is considered one of the worst aspects of the game by the community. There's multiple parts of the dungeon that are disliked, so I'll go over a quick rundown of the dungeon before going into more detail on the specific aspects of it. The Temple of the Ocean King is a 13-floor dungeon that you don't get the chance to explore fully on the first visit, instead doing it in increments of 3. These visits are how you get some key items for progression, and you have to do either 5 or 6 visits in order to complete the game. 5 if you get both Eastern Sea Charts in one visit, 6 if you don't. The first visit has you go through only the first floor to find Linebeck in the Southwestern Sea Chart. The second visit has you go down to the 3rd floor to get the Northwestern Sea Chart. The third visit has you go down to the 6th floor to get the Stamp of Courage, telling you where the Sun Key is. The 4th visit has you going down to floor 9 for the Southeastern Sea Chart, and then the player is given a choice that they might not notice at first. If the player is good enough and has enough time left in their hourglass, they can go back to floor 9 and put the stones in their pedestals in a certain order before making the way to floor 13 and getting the Northeastern Sea Chart in the same visit. This takes the total visits you need to do down to 5 instead of 6, as if you leave after getting to floor 9, you have to do another visit later to get the final sea chart. I really like this personally, as it rewards the player for being fast and getting through the temple with enough time to be able to do this in the first place, as well as clear the last 3 floors missing items that you're intended to have at that point. However, there are 4 main complaints about the temple that most people have. I just talked about the first one, the fact that you have to visit the dungeon a half dozen times in order to beat the game. These aren't optional visits either, as pretty much after each dungeon you're going back to the Temple of the Ocean King to get access to the next one. The only exceptions are the Temple of Courage into the Ghost Ship, and the Goron Temple into the Temple of Ice. The other 3 complaints are the timer on the dungeon, the forced stealth on the player with the phantoms, and the repetitiveness of the dungeon, both with having to repeat floors, as well as the mechanics of the dungeon as a whole. These are all really valid points. I used to really like this dungeon when I was growing up, but after my recent playthroughs for this video, I can understand why it's so controversial now. First off, the timer. Now, even as a kid, I never really had a problem with the timer. You start with 10 minutes, and get more Sand of Hours in the Phantom Hourglass in 2 ways. Each dungeon boss gives you 2 minutes, with the exception of the Ghost Ship, and there are 5 different treasure maps that lead to Sand of Hours, each of them giving you an extra minute. Inside the actual Temple of the Ocean King itself, there are a couple of different ways to affect the timer. On your first visit to the temple, you find out that standing outside of the glowing purple safe zones will make Link slowly take tick damage. Having time in the Phantom Hourglass, however, will prevent this tick damage, instead ticking down the timer. Just like how Link won't take damage in these safe zones, the timer will stop ticking down inside those safe zones as well. This makes it so you need to make good use of the safe zones, or the red pots that make small portable safe zones. There are also 2 ways to cause a large increase or decrease in the timer. Throughout the temple, there are yellow pots, and breaking them open drops additional sand for the hourglass for that run, often around 30 seconds worth. The Wizrobe enemies on some of the later floors also drop sand, but can also steal away 15 seconds when they hit you. There is also a way to lose 30 seconds, and that's by getting hit by the phantoms that roam the temple. Instead of only damaging Link, they reset Link's position to where he entered the room and drain 30 seconds from the timer. With all of these different ways to affect the timer, I actually kinda like it in this game. I'm normally not the biggest fan of timers in games, but the way it's been implemented into Phantom Hourglass makes it so you have to plan ahead and think out which path you're going to take between safe zones. However, this is also complemented with the next point, and one I'm not the biggest fan of: the phantoms. I honestly like the designs of the phantoms in this game. They're these giant, hulking, hollow armor sets with an eye in their back, and are honestly really intimidating, and make for a great enemy for this type of dungeon. But they can't be killed until the very last visit outside of some niche cases. You can stun them by hitting them in the back with your sword if you have the Spirit of Power equipped, or by using the bow, but you can't permanently get rid of them for majority of the floors for almost all of your runs throughout the temple. Instead, you just have to stealth around them. If you look at the top screen here, you can see where the phantoms are at all times, as well as their cone of vision, so it doesn't make it particularly hard, just tedious because you're forced to wait until they either move where you need them to, or look away from where you need to go. The phantoms can't see you if you're in a safe zone, but if they spot you, they will chase you as long as you're in their line of sight. They can also hear you, going and investigating if bombs will blow up or if they hear you melee a switch or a wall. There are 3 different types of phantoms, but they all function pretty much the same. You have the regular blue phantom, which are the slowest of the 3. The red phantoms are faster than the blue phantoms, both in their regular walking speed as well as their chasing speed. And then you have the gold phantoms, who move at the same speed as the blue phantoms, but will warp to where Link is once he gets detected by either another phantom or the phantom eyes. Speaking of the phantom eyes, they're these little propeller eyeballs that will alert phantoms to Link's location if they see him and slow him down after a short time. Unlike the phantoms, however, these can be killed like regular enemies. All you have to do is hit them with a boomerang to stun them, or hit them with something like the bow or the grappling hook. This forced stealth just doesn't feel that good. Granted, most games that have forced stealth sections don't do them super well to begin with, but god is it awful having to do forced stealth almost every other hour of gameplay, if even that long. And of course, that leads into what is probably the biggest complaint against the Temple of the Ocean King, just how damn repetitive it is. Like I said earlier, you need to visit the Temple of the Ocean King either 5 or 6 times depending on how far you go, and it almost always involves playing through the same floors that you've just played through. While this can be a little annoying, there are ways to speed it up, and it always involves the items that you've just gotten from the recent dungeons. For example, the second visit has you go through the first 3 floors and make you use the boomerang, but when you do the third visit and go to the 6th floor, you have to retread the first 3 floors as well. However, you now have the bombs from the Isle of Gust, and can open up various shortcuts to skip different parts of the puzzle in the various floors. For example, on the first basement floor, there's a bombable wall on the top path that takes you straight to the small key door, instead of having to go around and light the torches with the boomerang to open the path. This is a common trend through the whole dungeon, where you use the new items that you just found, but you're still retreading the same levels again and again and again. It's not the worst thing ever, but it's really just tedious, and tedium isn't great in games. I like the whole idea of having the new items available to make the floors faster and making new treasures available, and it works well with the timer, but it's just tedious. My first playthrough of the game for this video took me around 20 hours, with me doing most of the content in the game, with the exception of fishing and all of the treasure maps. I did all 6 visits to the Temple of the Ocean King because I wanted to collect all of the spirit gems before finishing the game. In total, I spent around 3 hours in this one dungeon on my first playthrough. I spent almost a fifth of my gameplay time inside of this one dungeon. That's just wild. I also had to do a second playthrough to get some footage of parts that I missed, meaning I got to go through the entire process again and not even 2 weeks after finishing it the first time. Before, my playthroughs are always spread out, maybe every couple of years or so I had forgotten most of the dungeon layouts and puzzles, but doing it almost back to back like this helped me realize just how tedious the Temple of the Ocean King can be. I honestly used to love the Temple of the Ocean King and thought it was a great idea, but it can just be such a drag sometimes. It wasn't until doing 2 playthroughs so close to each other that I really started to understand the complaints. It ended up taking the Temple of the Ocean King from a part I used to really like to one that I kinda just ended up tolerating. The only bright side was that my second playthrough I could just blitz through everything because I wasn't worried about collecting anything and I already knew the puzzles from doing it half a dozen times the week before. There is one very good aspect of the Temple of the Ocean King, however, and it ties into the last praise point in what I would consider the best part of Phantom Hourglass, the bosses. Praise point number 4, the bosses. The bosses in Phantom Hourglass are honestly the biggest highlight in my opinion. While they follow the general trend of Zelda bosses, with them being invulnerable until you do a certain mechanic to them using the dungeon item to stun them so you can smack them with your sword, with one exception in this game. However, in Phantom Hourglass, there's one aspect of the bosses that I think really brings them all to another level, and that's the use of the dual screens. Again, with one exception, but it's easily the worst boss in the game too. Wonder why that is. There are 8 main bosses, 1 in each dungeon, and 2 mini-bosses that you have to fight in order to beat the game. Unlike most Zelda games, there are no mid-dungeon mini-bosses that lock the dungeon item behind them, so there are less bosses than most games. There is also an optional boss, but it's just a slightly harder version of a mini-boss you've already fought before, and it's tied to a lengthy quest where you just run around to different islands talking to people, so it doesn't really count. For this section, we're just gonna go in the order you encounter them. The first dungeon, surprising literally nobody, has the first and easiest boss. The Temple of Fire houses Blaz, Master of Fire. Blaz is a very simple fight that makes use of the map on the top screen and the boomerang the player conveniently just found. Blaz will split into 3 smaller versions and float around shooting fireballs at you. What you need to do is look at the top screen and notice that each of the enemy icons has a different amount of horns. Using the boomerang, you need to hit the enemies in the order of how many horns they have. 1 horn first, then 2, then 3. This will make Blaz reform at the end of the boomerang's path, and you can hit him with your sword. He'll then teleport around for a short time and shoot fireballs before splitting again. Rinse and repeat until he dies and turns into sand. Now, as a dumb kid, I struggled so much with this fight, because I never apparently caught on to the fact that the top screen showed the order to boomerang them in. I used to just boomerang all 3 and slash at the group of them because it worked the one time I did it, and I just kept doing that until I beat the boss. Dumb childhood method aside, Blaz is a really good starting boss, both as an introduction of bosses as a whole, but also as an introduction of using the top screen in the fight. It's simple, it doesn't overwhelm the player, and is fairly obvious with what you're supposed to do, unless you're dumb like me. I wish I could say the same about the second boss. The second boss resides in the Temple of Wind. Cyclock, Stir of Winds, is a disappointment. He's the first and only boss that doesn't make any actual use of the top screen. Cyclock will fly around inside of a cyclone, shooting cyclones at the player, and in order to knock him down and hit him, you need to throw a bomb into one of the cyclones on the ground to lift it into the air, stunning him. You smack him with your sword until he cyclones again, and then rinse and repeat. There just isn't too much to say about Cyclock, and he's what I would consider the worst boss in the game. He's not remotely threatening, the player can't really speed up stunning him by using the item well because he just flies around and you have to wait for him to go over a cyclone, and he doesn't really make good use of the top screen at all. While you can see him flying around on it, the only thing it really tells you is when he sends a cyclone at you, and even then there's a sound cue. In order to stun Cyclock, you don't even need to use the top screen because it doesn't give you a good idea of where he is. Instead, you just use the bottom screen and look for his shadow. It takes away from what makes the Phantom Hourglass bosses so unique, which is the use of the dual screens. And it just makes it feel like a regular Zelda boss, but even then it's still lacking. It only has like 2 attacks, and the entire fight is just timing your bomb throws. At least on the bright side, it only goes up from here. The first of the mini-bosses you fight is just outside Melita Island after getting the Sun Key from the ocean floor. When heading to Melita to access the Temple of Courage, right before you can dock, a giant eye plant rises from the water. This fight's just really simple. You need to draw a route back and forth and shoot at the boss's eye with the ship's cannon. Occasionally it'll fire projectiles back at you, and you need to shoot them out of the air. Just keep shooting at it and it'll die, allowing access to Melita Island once more. There is also a second version of this fight as part of the trading sequence questline, but it's no different from this one. This is also followed up by one of the most inventive bosses in Phantom Hourglass, Cryak, Bane of Courage. Cryak starts the fight completely invisible, and instead of a map on the top screen, we actually get to see from the boss's point of view. You need to wait until Cryak is charging at Link to shoot him with the arrow. You use the top screen to find which direction the boss is coming from and shoot at his eye. Once you've done this, he will hide inside his shell and start to spin. You need to shoot at all the purple weak points as he spins with the bow, and breaking all of them starts the second phase. If you fail to break all of the weak points in time, he will once again turn invisible and you need to shoot at his eye again. After breaking all of the purple weak spots on Cryak's shell, his shell will break and phase 2 will begin. He now uses his claws to block his eye, but he has a convenient glowing blue butt for you to swing at. You swing at his face, making him bring up his guard, and then you run around, hitting his butt until he becomes sand. Cryak is just a really good boss, and one of my favorite uses of the dual screen in Phantom Hourglass. A trick like this gets used in a later fight, and it works really well there, but having the different perspective as a part of the boss fight is really good. Something like this, with how seamless it is something that can really only be done on the DS, and it's just a fantastic use of the DS's capabilities. Following Cryak is the first and only dungeon boss in Phantom Hourglass to not have an item tied to it. Link doesn't even hit them with the sword during the fight, which might be a first in the series? I don't know, I still have almost a dozen other games to play. They might have done that before Phantom Hourglass came out. On the ghost ship, after rescuing all 4 sisters, you find out they're actually evil. Oh no, who could have seen that coming? The diabolical Cubist sisters are the classic tradition of Zelda ping pong. They'll be up on the top screen and Link will be on the bottom. Occasionally, they'll shoot a ball of energy that Link will have to slash back to them. One sister will be shooting the ball of energy, while the other 3 will be firing lasers to block off parts of the ship deck. After ping-ponging 2 orbs back, the first sister will die, and another one will start firing balls while the other 2 continue to fire lasers. They will also start to fire another type of orb, this one having multiple smaller orbs inside of it. You can't deflect these, and when they hit the wall behind Link, they split into multiple orbs that hurt you. They also start to bounce the orbs between themselves before throwing it back at Link, making it so the player has to pay attention to which sister is launching the orb back at you. There is also the chance that because of this, the orbs will hit different sisters, making the phases take longer than usual. They also speed up how fast they throw the orbs at you until there's only one sister left. Now, she'll fire 3 orbs at one time, with only one of them being able to hit back and the other 2 being the multi-orbs. Just keep playing ping pong and the last sister will die. How enjoyable this fight is depends entirely on how good you've gotten at using the touchscreen to attack. Because you can't just tap on the orbs to deflect them and you have to actually swipe at them, it can make the fight a bit more difficult if you're not used to swinging your sword around. Outside of accidentally walking into the orbs when you're trying to swing, there isn't too much of a threat in this fight, and it's just kind of a nice change of pace compared to the normal, use the new dungeon item to make the boss vulnerable and then swing at them, that is most Zelda bosses. The next boss is actually the second mini-boss of the game. I couldn't find a name for it, but just outside of Goron Island, there's a giant 6-eyed whale that rises from the depths and flies around. It's not much of a fight, you kinda just sit there and shoot cannonballs at its eyes, 2 for each eye, and shoot the projectiles out of the air. It's honestly a really lame mini-boss, but it's still a mini-boss, so I guess it needed to be included. Once you've killed it, you can head into Goron Island. At the end of the Goron Temple, you find Don Garango, Armored Lizard. Thanks to the quicksand, we can't get across to Don Garango, instead having to control Gongaron to fight the boss. Using Gongaron, we attack Don Garango's side until he falls over, taking back control over Link. Good god, why are these names so similar? When Don Garango is on his side, the mouth will be open, so you need to use Bomb Chews to draw a line leading to his mouth while making sure the snake things don't reach Link, otherwise you have to switch control to kill them. Do this 3 times for phase 1. After beating phase 1, a bridge will spawn that lets Link cross the quicksand, but once reaching the other side, Don Garango wakes up. He was the only boss to not turn into quicksand after all. Phase 2 is pretty simple. His attacks are mostly the same, with the big change being that he'll occasionally start inhaling air similar to the like-likes you find earlier in the dungeon. While he's going into Kirby mode, all you have to do is throw a bomb in his mouth in order to get him to swallow it. Once it explodes, he'll get stunned and allow you to smack the giant glowing blue orb on his back. Rinse and repeat until he becomes sand. Don Garango is a really interesting fight because of switching the control between Link and Gongaron. Having to use both of them for the first phase is unique, and rather than feeling like one character does the whole fight, it feels like a team effort, with Link needing Gongaron to stun Don Garango. Gongaron also controls differently to Link, with him rolling more instead of just running, making that part of the fight feel unique rather than just Link in a different skin. The second phase isn't super interesting, but the first phase makes up for it. Unfortunately, this boss, like Cyclock, doesn't make the best use of the top screen, but due to how the fight works, the top screen being the map is kinda needed. You need to be able to see the enemies approaching Link, and you need to be able to see where you're drawing the bomb chew to. This, unfortunately, just takes away from one of the unique aspects of most of the other bosses to me. Now, we're done with the Gorons and their confusing names. For this game at least. The next boss, Guardian of Pure Metal, is one that you're probably familiar with if you've played other Zelda games, as it's the only recurring boss in this game. For once, it isn't some version of a Goma, instead it's Gleeok, Two-Headed Dragon. A returning enemy from multiple previous Zelda games, Gleeok serves as the guardian of the Ice Temple's pure metal. Gleeok's 2 heads both use different elemental attacks, the left using fire and the right using ice. The Gleeoks appear on the top screen, and you use that to tell which head is where. For the first phase of the fight, you need to use the grappling hook to make a diagonal line using the 4 posts to bounce the attacks back at the opposite head. If the fire head shoots a fireball, make a line to deflect it to the ice head, and if the ice head shoots an ice ball, deflect it to the fire head. Do this until both of their masks break off. You do have to be careful, however, as after making a rope, one of the heads will move close to the platform and bite at it, hitting you and severing the rope. Just move away from the head to dodge it. They will also dive under the water, causing a big wave to hit the platform. Jump up onto one of the pegs to avoid it, and then jump down after to avoid the ice that follows the tidal wave. After breaking both masks, you enter phase 2. Gleeok will bite off the 2 front pegs, leaving you with only the back ones on each side. Instead of firing projectiles, now the Gleeok will start inhaling air. When it does that, connect its tongue to the respective peg with the grapple hook. It will stun the head, letting you smack at it with your sword. Rinse and repeat until both heads become sand. This fight is really cool, but can also be really confusing if you don't realize everything the grappling hook is capable of. Replaying through the game for this video, I forgot about being able to drag enemies to places with the grappling hook, which made the second phase really difficult because I just couldn't figure out how to stun him at first. This was the only boss that took me multiple tries because of that. Gleeok does make fantastic use of the multiple unique things that the grappling hook can do, which is really nice. Most bosses are only using the item for one mechanic that repeats, but having to use two different uses of the grappling hook is a nice change of pace, and it goes to show just how versatile the grappling hook is in Phantom Hourglass. The penultimate boss in Phantom Hourglass is the Guardian of Muto's Temple, Eox, Ancient Stone Soldier. Eox is a giant stone soldier that has multiple big red pins on him. He moves around the arena fairly slowly, occasionally taking swings at Link. He also has a ranged attack where he fires multiple arrows from his mouth. Using the hammer you found earlier in the dungeon, you need to hit the pins on him in order to break his armor. He does have pins higher up on his body, however, and in order to hit those you have to use the catapults to launch yourself into the air with the hammer, and hit the bolts while you're in the air. After you've hit all the bolts, you enter Phase 2. In Phase 2, there will be even more red pins on Eox, and once again, you need to hit all of them, this time in quick succession. Otherwise, they'll turn all back to red. Once all 4 bolts are blue, Eox will fall to the ground and enter Phase 3. In Phase 3, Eox is just a head that'll be bouncing around firing arrows. All you need to do is use a catapult to launch yourself on top of his head, and then swing at the crystal on top of his head. Repeat until sand. Eox is an interesting fight. He isn't particularly hard, but he is very janky. I don't know if this is just because I was playing on an emulator in order to record this, but the hit registration with the hammer wasn't great. It didn't really feel consistent, and it made the fight a lot harder than it really seemed it should have been. You can see from the footage in the fight that even though it looks like I should be hitting them, I'm not. Even with that, it's still a really cool fight. The final fight of the game, and the evil at the depths of the Temple of the Ocean King, is Bellum, Evil Phantom. The ultimate evil in Phantom Hourglass and the cause of all the problems you've faced so far. Like most Zelda final bosses, Bellum is a multi-part fight with each part being drastically different, so let's go over them. The first phase has you fighting Bellum at the bottom of the Temple of the Ocean King. He starts the fight by entering a pool of purple goop and will shoot projectiles at Link as well as occasionally summon small enemies that resemble phantom eyes. All you need to do is with your grapple hook grab all of the purple goop off of Bellum. Once you've done that, he'll float towards you stunned and you're able to smack him with your sword. After enough hits, he'll leave the goop and float up to the second floor of the Temple of the Ocean King. On the second floor, Bellum will have tentacles wrapped around all of the different pillars with eyes on the back of them. Using your bow, you need to go around the different pillars shooting the eyes on the tentacles. After hitting all of them, Bellum will fall back into the pool and will repeat Phase 1 again. After dealing enough damage, Phase 2 will repeat, only this time the eyes on the tentacles close. When they're closed, the arrows won't deal damage, so you need to time your shots properly for when they're open. Once you've hit enough eyes, Bellum will once again float up another floor. All you have to do is move around the pillars and shoot the eyes on the tentacles. Once you've hit them all, a glowing green orb will be released from Bellum. This is Ciella's true power, revealing herself as a spirit of time and courage. Now having her true power returned to her, Ciella now has the power to stop time temporarily. Return to the first floor for the third phase of the fight. Bellum will now be floating around the room. Occasionally, Ciella will release a Phantom Sphere, allowing Link to draw an hourglass and freeze time for a short time. What you need to do is use this power while Bellum is circling the arena. While time is frozen, Link can go up to Bellum and smack his eye while he's stuck, allowing you to damage him. Rinse and repeat until Bellum's been defeated. Link and Ciella will be teleported outside of the Temple of the Ocean King and onto Linebeck's ship. After a small cutscene where Tetra wakes up, Bellum will pop back up, snatching her away and beginning Part 2 of the fight. Part 2 takes place entirely on the ship, with Bellum having taken control over the ghost ship. This part of the fight is really simple. All you have to do is shoot the eyes on the ghost ship and the projectiles out of the air. You don't need to worry about navigation, Linebeck's got you covered on that front. Keep blasting the eyes until they stop respawning and the ghost ship is cleared of Bellum's eyes. Now begins Part 3, the final fight. After a cutscene where you board the wreckage of the ghost ship, Bellum will capture and take control of Linebeck, turning him into a phantom. Phantom Linebeck cannot be hurt from the front, and when you try to circle around him, he'll turn to stop you. Ciella will then release a Phantom Sphere, letting you stop time to circle around Phantom Linebeck, but the eye on his back is closed, so you can't actually attack Bellum. Now, the top screen becomes a second view, where Ciella is flying behind Phantom Linebeck so you can see when the eye is open. However, Ciella gets captured by Bellum and isn't able to release a sphere for you. In order to free Ciella to drop a sphere, you need to clash with Phantom Linebeck. Attack him enough times and you'll start a clash where you need to rub the stylus back and forth to overpower him. Once you've done that, hit him once more to freeze Ciela for long enough to drop a sphere. All that's left is to freeze time when Bellum's eye is open, and then slash at it while time is frozen. Just rinse and repeat until Bellum's been defeated and Linebeck is freed from the Phantom armor. The Bellum fight is one that I have mixed feelings about, mostly due to the boat section that makes up part 2. The flow of the fight just kinda feels broken up by having what is essentially just an auto-scroller point-and-click adventure in the middle of the final boss. I get that they wanted to include the ship somehow into the final boss, considering it's kind of the game's entire gimmick, but it just kinda feels lacking compared to the other 2 parts of the fight. The first part is simple, using items from past dungeons in order to make the boss vulnerable before we can use the Phantom Sword on him, and it introduces the ability to stop time with Ciela. I honestly like this idea, that the fairy we've had by our side the entire time was the key to defeating Bellum, and it also captures the partner feel Zelda games like to do, just this time having a fairy instead of Zelda as your partner. It feels like a culmination of not only Link's journey, but also Ciela's journey with Link, starting with her having no memories except of being cared for by Oshus, to getting some of her memories and power back from the Temple of Courage, to finally getting her true power returned in the finale of the game, and being the key to beating Bellum. It just kinda helps give the feeling that Link wasn't the only one on the journey like he is in most Zelda games, and that Ciela has just as important a role in Phantom Hourglass. Like I said earlier, I'm not the biggest fan of the second part with the ghost ship, but it is nice seeing Linebeck step up in the finale too. We've seen him become less self-centered as time has gone on, and how he started to care for Link and Ciela, even if he hides it from them. He stepped up a couple times too, but with him stepping up to man the ship at the end, and him stepping up at the start of the third part to free Link and Ciela from Bellum, it gives both characters that have been traveling with Link the entire journey a nice ending to their character arcs, making some already likable characters even more enjoyable. The final part of the Bellum fight where you fight Phantom Linebeck is really cool too. It's the only boss that you actually clash with, having an actual sword fight rather than just using an item and wailing on the boss. It's also nice that they step away from using any dungeon items in the fight, only using the Phantom Sword and Ciela's time stop. It's also one of the few fights that has a level of tension in the game because you're not just fighting some evil monster, you're fighting a suit of armor with Linebeck in it, your friend who's been with you the entire journey. You're not only just fighting to defeat the big bad evil at the end of the game, but to free both Linebeck and Tetra. It's a level of personal stakes only some Zelda games have at the end, as most final bosses either only have Zelda as a hostage, or have her actually participating in the fight. It's a small thing, but it makes the final fight feel more impactful because of it. Replaying Phantom Hourglass was an interesting experience to say the least. I was doing a little research on the game before playing it, mostly to see what the general Zelda community online thought about the game, and was a little worried that it would have an effect on how I looked at and enjoyed the game. Despite how much negativity I saw about certain aspects of the game, I'm honestly really glad that it didn't end up affecting my enjoyment of the game. Going into the game, I was hoping that Phantom Hourglass lived up to my childhood memories, and it did, for the most part. There were definitely some parts of the game that I don't think really hold up, like the Temple of the Ocean King, but Phantom Hourglass was still as enjoyable as Child Me thought it was. It definitely has some problems still, and I generally agree with the different pain points I listed earlier in the video, but man, maybe it's just because I have so much nostalgia for this game, but it's just fun. Yeah, some parts of the game did kinda start to drag, with having to do 2 playthroughs because I forgot to get some footage of parts, made things like the Temple of the Ocean King get a little annoying, just because I had to run through the dungeon 11 times to get the footage for this video. Granted, that's my fault for not just recording everything in the game during my first playthrough, but that doesn't change the fact that the Temple of the Ocean King started to get a little more tedious than I'd like, and that's even with me knowing how to speed through it. The rest of the game really didn't have that feeling, but that's also helped by the game just not being very long. Each dungeon only took me around 20 minutes, and some of them took longer to unlock than they did to complete. The story of Phantom Hourglass is okay, I guess. I kinda covered it a little bit earlier, but it's really just go get the fairies to rescue Tetra from the ghost ship, then go get the 3 ores to make the Phantom Sword to slay Bellum to turn Tetra back into a human instead of a rock. This might just be due to the DS's limitations, I'm not sure, but the story was kinda just there. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't really good either. Phantom Hourglass is honestly kinda carried story-wise by the characters. Linebeck and Ciela are both fun companions, with them having unique personalities and even bickering with each other, as well as both of them getting quite good character development through the story. Oshus isn't bad either, with him playing the role of both Link's mentor in the beginning of the game, and then as the Ocean King in the later half, but he doesn't really hang around too much. Outside of them, however, you don't really get too many characters. There's some every once in a while that stick around for a little bit, but that's mostly it. The rest of the characters are contained almost exclusively to their island and their dungeon, with the exception of Gongaron, who has 2. While not a bad thing, you just don't really get to see them very often, which is kind of a shame because some of them are just fun characters, like the Inoki and the Yuke on the Isle of Frost. At the end of the day, Phantom Hourglass is still a very fun game and a very good DS game, but I admit, compared to the other Zelda games I've played, it doesn't hold up as well as I remembered it. It was still very fun to experience a game from my childhood like this again, and it still holds up quite well in some aspects. I honestly do think that Phantom Hourglass is an underrated Zelda game, and that people tend to hate on it a little too much just because it tried things differently than other Zeldas before it. But we also see the same thing with people's opinions on the newer games like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, so some things just never really change. Like every franchise, there's people that think that every game needs to be exactly the same as the one that came before without any advancement. While it's not a bad thing, trying new things is important for a franchise that's gone on as long as Zelda has, and for the most part they succeeded with it. Honestly, if Phantom Hourglass wasn't supposed to be a direct sequel to Wind Waker, I don't think it would have gotten as much hate as it did. But there's nothing we can really do to change that now. All we can do is play the game that was made. This video got out of hand. Originally, this video was just supposed to be me talking about the Temple of the Ocean King, but 15,000 words later, and months of working and procrastinating on it, we're finally here. I honestly didn't think I had this much to say about the game, but I really do love Phantom Hourglass despite its flaws, and hopefully if you made it this far, I hope to appreciate some of the really cool things that Nintendo did and tried to do with it. I'm probably not the most qualified person to talk about Zelda, just because I haven't played all of the different games, but hopefully you enjoyed me talking and rambling about a game I love from my childhood that I wish people appreciated more. I know I mentioned it in the intro too, but I am planning on streaming my first playthroughs of the other Zelda games that I've missed, both here on YouTube or on my Twitch. And I'm definitely going to make more videos like this on them once I finish those playthroughs. They may not be as in-depth as this one is, because I won't have the history with them, but if you're interested, why not subscribe? I'm planning on doing more than just Zelda 2, like an Outer Wilds video that I'm currently working on, and other games in the future too. Anyways, thank you for watching. I've been Echo, and I'll see you next time.